Okay, welcome to our lesson on the circulatory system. This system talks about the method our body uses to transport different things from one side of our body to the other side of our body. The most important or the main components of these would be things like the heart, the blood vessels, the blood, all of those make up the circulatory system. So the human circulatory system is made up of 1, blood, right? 2, the heart, and 3, blood vessels. The purpose of the blood vessels is to carry the blood as it's transporting things from different parts of our body to other parts of our bodies. So we've got our blood, our heart, and our blood vessels. All together, they make up the circulatory system. So let's take a look at our first component, which is the blood. And the blood circulates throughout the entire body. It's made up of 4 components, the first being red blood cells. And this is probably the most abundant of the different components of blood, and most of blood are red blood cells. They contain a protein called hemoglobin, and hemoglobin does 2 things. 1, it gives it its red appearance, and 2, it transports oxygen to all different parts of our body. So this is a huge component of blood because oxygen is a huge component of our bodies. In our previous lesson, we talked about the digestive system and how the different organs have different functions. All of those organs, if they did not have oxygen, would not be able to do what they're supposed to be doing. So it's very important that the blood takes oxygen through the protein of hemoglobin and transports it to all different parts of our body so that each component of our body can do what it's supposed to do. Our second component of blood is what we call white blood cells. These are blood cells that fight viruses and bacteria within our blood. They're a very, very small component of our blood, though. So most of our blood is red blood cells. Very, very little of it is white blood cells. Another small component of it is what we call platelets. These are very, very tiny cells that help with blood clotting. So if you get a cut, the reason why you don't bleed out entirely is because your blood has the ability to clot and stop flowing so that you're not actually losing all of your blood. The fourth component is plasma. So plasma is a protein-rich liquid that helps carry the blood along as it's flowing throughout your body. So the 4 components of blood: red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, platelets. You should know all 4, and you should know the function of all 4 of those as well. Moving on to our second part of the circulatory system, we have our heart. The main function of the heart is that it pumps blood, and you'll find that it's made up of a few different types of tissue. So now looking back at our previous lessons on tissues and tissue types, we looked at a few different types. Our heart is made up of 3 different types of tissue. The first is cardiac muscle tissue, cardiac meaning heart. Our second is nerve tissue, right? So connecting us to the nervous system. And then we've got connective tissue as well. It's only when all 3 of this comes together that we have our heart and it's able to do entirely what it's supposed to do. So our heart pumps blood at a regular speed usually. What causes the speed to change? So think about what some of the things you might be doing when your heart rate or the rate in which blood is pumped from your heart changes. The most obvious example would be when you're doing some sort of physical activity, right? So if you're running along, you might notice that your heart rate is a lot faster. The reason why it's faster is because your muscles and your arms and your legs are doing a lot more work than usual, which means it needs more oxygen. So your blood has to flow through that a lot faster to allow for more oxygen to get to those different parts of your body. Okay, now we're again at the part of our system where we have to do a lot of memorizing and understanding the different parts of it. I will try my best to explain it, but A lot of it is on you. It will take time, but it is pretty interesting and it's pretty fun to memorize all of these different words. So we're going to start over here, and our first component that we're going to look at is made up of two parts. So this up here and this down here are part of the same thing. They are what we call the vena cava, or large veins. And we'll look at what veins mean in just a second. But so we've got vena cava, and then this little area right here are what we call the right atrium, and down here is the right ventricle. And then this area that's connecting these two parts together is what we call the septum. And if you know what a septum piercing is, most people have it, or a lot of people with the septum piercing have it between their nose, right? It's sort of connecting the left and the right part of your nose. That's called a septum, so you can sort of think about that same way in your heart as well, right? You've got that left and the right components as well. Now moving up, we're going to be looking at this particular vessel here. I'm going to try and highlight that for you because it is a little bit. So we've got this, it starts up right here, and then it continues all along here. This is part of it, this is part of it, this is part of it. Even this part that comes up behind there is part of it. And it continues all throughout behind that heart, and then it ends up down here. It's very important that you sort of understand the structure of that, because when we're looking at how blood flows, it plays a huge part. If you get it, you'll sort of understand how the blood is flowing. And this large structure starting here and ending all the way there is what we call the aorta. So that is a large artery. So previously we looked at a large vein that we had here. Now we have our large artery. Now looking at here, this T-shaped structure, that is our pulmonary artery. I'm going to maybe try and use a different color. I don't know if we can do that. Right, so this is our pulmonary artery. Then we have our pulmonary veins. So those are two different things. Let's choose a different color. Let's try magenta. So these are our pulmonary veins. And then we have our left atrium, which is right here, and our left ventricle, which is right here as well. So all of these together are the components of our heart. There's a lot more actually, but for now we're just focusing on the basics. If you look at, for example, the right ventricle, there's a lot more for you to know, but we won't get into that in grade 10. You will probably need to learn that in grade 11 or grade 12. So all of this are the components of our heart. I want you to take a second and really understand and memorize this. So take your time right now, because if you understand this before going forward with the rest of the lesson, it'll make the rest of the lesson easier. Okay, so pause if you need to, go through it, rewind, listen to it again, and really memorize all of these components of the heart. Our third component of the circulatory system, so we looked at blood, we looked at the heart, now we're going to look at the blood vessels. There are three types of blood vessels that work to transport blood to different parts of our body. The first of it being arteries. And arteries carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. So let's take a look at our structure again. We've got large artery right here. And our large artery, which is this structure in yellow, takes blood away from the heart. So keep that in mind before we get into the flow of blood in our heart, that arteries take blood away from the heart. Our second type of blood vessel are our veins, which carry blood into the heart. And lastly, we've got capillaries that eventually connect the veins and the arteries together. So when you're looking at gas exchange, which we'll talk about in a lot more detail for our respiratory system lesson, our arteries and our veins carry oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood. So blood with oxygen and blood without oxygen. What the capillaries do is it allows for that blood to go from our arteries into our veins. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood into the heart. Okay, so in this particular diagram, it's the same diagram we looked at earlier, we are going to be looking at how blood flows throughout all of these components of the heart. And we will start exactly where we started for labeling, which is at the vena cava. So these are our large veins, right? And if you recall just a few seconds ago, veins carry blood into the heart. So the part of the vena cava that's at the top brings blood from any part of our body that's above our heart, and our vena cava at the bottom brings blood from below the heart. So together it's bringing a lot of blood into our heart. And that blood ends up in our right atrium and then slowly moves into our right ventricle, right? So starts off at the vena cava, goes into the right atrium, then goes into the right ventricle, and then it moves into the pulmonary artery. And this T-shaped structure, right, there's two ways that this blood can leave the heart, right? So there's one to the left and one to the right. That leads to either side of our lungs. So if you know anything about our lungs, you know that there's two lobes to it. One part of this pulmonary artery takes it to the left side, one part of it takes it to the right side. So it makes sense why there are two parts for this. And then that blood goes into the lungs, and then it comes back through our pulmonary veins. Again, veins meaning that blood is coming back into the heart. Then it goes into our left atrium, our left ventricle. Then it moves into our aorta, or our big artery. So that blood is moving from here all the way here and then back there. It keeps going until it's there at the bottom. Okay, so just to recap that all from the start. So you've got our vena cava. The blood flows in from different parts of the body through there. Then it goes to our right atrium, right ventricle, then to the pulmonary arteries, which take it away from the heart and towards the lungs. And then from the lungs, that blood comes back to the pulmonary veins. Then it goes into the left atrium, left ventricle, then to the aorta, and then to all different areas of our body. So that is that cycle that happens with our blood all throughout the heart and then all throughout the body as well. So the main function of the circulatory system is to, one, transport substances across the body. So it moves several different things, mainly nutrients absorbed from the intestines to the rest of the body. We talked about in the digestive system how our small intestines with our villi are able to absorb nutrients and then transfer it over to the bloodstream. That bloodstream then takes these nutrients and transports it to the rest of the body. Then we have oxygen. It carries oxygen to every part of our body. And lastly, it carries waste from the body's tissues for disposal. So our second function of our circulatory system is to regulate body temperature, right? So if you've ever been somewhere really cold, you might notice that part of your body being very red. That's because that blood is flowing into that area trying to maintain that temperature. Number 3, it transports disease-fighting white blood cells to areas of the body where there are viruses or bacteria so that those white blood cells can fight those off. There are 2 diseases or disorders of the circulatory system that I want to briefly talk about. The first is coronary heart disease. So coronary arteries are blood vessels. Remember, artery, what do those do? They take blood from the heart to different parts of the body. And these coronary arteries provide blood to the heart muscle itself. And when these blood vessels become partially blocked because of fat or cholesterol or calcium, coronary heart disease is the result of it. Causes of this could be genetic. It could be a high-fat diet, smoking, lack of exercise. All of these might contribute to coronary heart disease. So there are two disorders or diseases of the circulatory system that I want to quickly talk about. One is coronary heart disease. So the coronary arteries themselves are blood vessels that provide blood to the heart tissue itself. When these blood vessels become partially blocked due to fat or cholesterol or calcium, what results is coronary heart disease. Different causes of this could be genetics, it could be a high-fat diet, it could be smoking, it could be lack of exercise. All of these things are contributing factors to coronary heart disease. The second disease or disorder that I want to look at is the heart attack. So when coronary arteries become completely blocked with plaque or blood or with a blood clot, what results is a heart attack. When this happens, the heart can no longer receive oxygen and nutrients that it needs to function. And this means that the heart stops pumping, which means that those heart tissue starts to die. That's pretty much it for our circulatory system. What I want you to do for homework is 1, memorize the different parts of the heart. Number 2, memorize the flow of blood through the circulatory system. Read through the section in the textbook and then do questions 1, 2, 3.